The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical psychology for today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, narrated by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. In this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from Sufi Thought and Action by Idries Shah. This audio is made available by the Idries Shah Foundation. Ritual, Initiation and Secrets in Sufi Circles by Franz Heidelberger and others. Time spent among Sufis. Franz Heidelberger. The very first thing you find out when you spend time among Sufis is that most of what is written about them ceases to have any relevance. My own first objective when contacting real Sufi groups was to update my knowledge and to add to the available stock of information. In fact, neither enterprise is possible. The reason is that the whole range of information about the Sufis and Sufism, and it is colossal, is heavily interlarded with all kinds of misconceptions, inventions, imagining and misinterpretations, rendering the overall picture quite useless. Some of this, it is true, is due to the efforts of the Sufis themselves, who protect their own information stock by adding materials which make the work of scholars and of intending imitators very difficult, in fact, virtually impossible. If you concentrate upon, say, the writings of a certain era in history to try to find out what the Sufis were doing at that specific time, you will also find that what has been committed to paper, even in those times, does not constitute the real or whole substance of the effort. In fairness, it should be admitted that the Sufis have warned us of this, saying, as did Rumi, that the Sufi secrets are perceived, not understood by words. Even those of them who will write for publication follow the adage that the Sufi is he who has been taught caution. Ultimately, the only way to know what the Sufis are doing is to join them, if they will let you. This paper will concentrate upon ideas which seem strange to us, even those of us who are steeped in the literature known to the world of learning, but which have at least some sort of rationale, either in familiar terms or else in the special world of Sufi thought. As for the question of appearing in another form, the riddle wrapped in an enigma of Sufi reality does provide interesting examples of how the Sufi appears able to change his appearance. There are innumerable accounts of Sufis appearing taller, shorter, fatter, thinner, with or without beards, in fact, like completely different people, from one moment or one person to the next. 2 or more people will be found again and again saying that a certain Sufi master looked like this, while others who saw him at the same time will give conflicting descriptions. The only explanation for this, which is hardly a solution at all, is that there is something given out or emanated by the Sufi which disturbs or reconstitutes the visual. I have noticed this myself. It can only be described as the effect which one would experience if the person were not really there, but there was something which was able to project a complete human being and change the image, three-dimensional as it appears, together with most, but not all, of the characteristics, such as the walk, voice, or clothing. I am aware that in saying this I may be thought to have put my sanity in question, but on the other hand a time may come when all this is found to have a perfectly sensible explanation. If there is, in fact, a capacity to project images direct into another person's mind, this may account for the ability of Sufis, again witnessed countless times, to alter people's behavior. This is sometimes called bringing out the real character of the individual. It may show you what this person is really like. It may be better or worse than the image which you have of the individual. It is said to be used for teaching purposes, and is as if the Sufi can interrupt or disturb, and replace the working of the mind, as an electromagnetic wave might interfere with the sound from a radio or the picture from a television apparatus. Priest, magician, and Sufi. The Sufis, according to their own account, following their personal illumination, are here to help others along the path. I emphasize here because right at the beginning there is a problem of definition for the pedantic, or shall we say logical, through the use of this word. Does here mean on this earth? Or does it mean among the people who encounter him? The best opinion seems to hold that the Sufi, quite literally, means that he is voluntarily on the earth in the guise of a human being as we know it, to help others. This, of course, introduces the conception of there being a guise, they sometimes actually call it garb, of humanity, and that there is an option in the matter. Could they be somewhere else and appearing in a different form if they were there? Again, the answer must be that they think that the answer to both of these questions is yes. One Sufi said, "If you think that this is odd, well, so do many people think you are odd in believing that man has an immortal soul. Hundreds of millions of people in India believe that human beings are reincarnated. Almost as many think that people can turn into Buddhas. So do not use your culture-bound attitudes to label others as unusual in their thoughts." This method of putting Sufi ideas into the terminology, culture-bound, etc., of the 20th century is nowadays standard among the Sufi theoreticians. This could be a reason for the Sufi use of a phrase which also rings oddly in our ears, coming from men themselves. It is, "The Sufi is the friend of man." Incidentally, these powers are said to be used by the Sufis also to test the stability and condition of the student. People who are subjected to such experiences, either on themselves or seeing them happen to others, are observed by the Sufi in order to ascertain if they are emotionally moved by the experience. If they are, the training stops until it is found that they can observe rather than be impressed. This technique is, of course, the reverse of that of the charlatan, who would use it if he could to impress, not to test and select those who did not respond. Many Sufi techniques are, be it noted, based on the conception of a lack of response is better theme, a direct reversal of our customary way of looking at things. Not all Sufis are teachers, technically termed directors, but those who are such do need special capabilities. Nuri, the great Central Asian Sufi born in Baghdad who died in 908 AD, was called Yasus al-Kab, spy of the heart, because he could read anyone's thoughts, a function which he developed through great self-discipline. This capacity is customarily exercised by Sufi masters only in their professional capacity, to help them help their own disciples through extrasensory abilities, especially telepathy. Unlike the priest, the Sufi master is not seen as a permanent intermediary between humans and the beyond. Here is the link, but a link which has to teach others how to become links, and how to escape from a bondage which is how the world is described. The relative roles of the three major traditional spiritual types in human communities may be seen as follows. The priest, sacerdotal function including celebrating rituals handed down by a ceremony, specializes in working with social organizations, employs emotion and sentiment. Shaman or magician provides sporadic contact with higher invisible powers. Frenzy-induced techniques inspire fear, probably in himself as well as others. Sufi special powers connecting to the beyond exercised as part of overall educational plan, has learnt and teaches by experience, opposes emotionality. Sufi techniques vary, or appear to do so, in accordance with the individuality of the master and the characteristics of the milieu in which he is working. Hence, as instances, Rumi, died 1273, carried on a school in what is today Turkey, with exercises and poetry. Ghazali, died 1111, reached his audience through books in closely reasoned form, current from Syria to Spain. Hujwiri, died 1072, lived in India and asserted that it was important to learn through the lives of previous masters and to know technical terms. Today, again using the means which reaches his own audience and makes use of their own preoccupations, Idries Shah, the current exponent of the Sufis, projects the teaching in the idioms of literature, psychology, and sociology. He also uses humour and university platforms. All these have had the unusually powerful effect which people have come to associate with the appearance of an authentic exponent of the path. The Sufi teachers themselves, perhaps we should note, never attribute such success to themselves, but rather to the higher energies which flow through their work. With the support of these, it is held, they cannot fail. There is no doubt that something has given the first three of these teachers an astonishing duration of influence, and the last named seems certain to gain as much prominence and range. The learners and the teachers' viewpoints. The viewpoints of those who believe that they wish to learn from Sufis, however, does not always accord with the true situation, however clearly or appositely the materials are presented. Many of the raw, this is a Sufi technical term, appellant's desires, including those which actually lead him to the teaching, are utterly unsuited to him as a good disciple. Just as the eggshell protects that which is to become a chicken until it is ready to be born, so the habits of the seeker may enable him to reach the teacher. Thereafter, however, like the shell which has to be pecked away, the neophyte must cast this casing aside, says one Sufi ancient. Another told me, the snake will die without its skin. When the time comes to slough it, though, she will die if she tries to hold on to it, through suffocation. Sufis have told me again and again how they find that seekers who have spent perhaps years in trying to perfect themselves, or even to improve themselves, have only succeeded in toughening the shell. This is because, as one put it, the baby bird will automatically do the right thing, pecking his way out of the egg. This is an inborn capacity. But the human being will try to break his shell by adding to those things which reinforce it. Small wonder that Sufis are always saying that disciples are their own worst enemies. The Sufi explanation of the harm which the disciple does to himself is that, unlike the baby chicken, which has a program and does nothing else, virtually, than to try to escape from the eggshell at the right moment, the human seeker is already partly grown up, and full of what are at present colloquially called hang-ups. These ideas and fantasies make him do all kinds of things to himself which actually hold up his progress. The conflict of expectation with reality, when the seeker finds out what the school expects, is his first real shock. But this is so important that it is no exaggeration to say that this point really signals the first authentic contact with that special reality which may be called the spiritual, and that is the point which tests the potential of the learner. Not only that, it is not too much to say that any teacher or school which does not shake the chief assumptions of the disciple is not a genuine one. At any rate, it is not an effective one, for in such a case the veils, those things which stand in the way of spiritual perceptions, remain to cover and distort. Those of us who have not experienced the Sufi contact as a teaching phenomenon cannot really begin to understand what it is, unless we make a strong effort to face something which is outside our ordinary ken. Sufi teaching, as has been noted, takes place only by an interaction between the master and his disciple, following, in many cases, a preparatory period in which the learner has been exposed to special techniques and impacts, perhaps in a group set up by the Sufis for this purpose. The disciple can only be taught by the master when circumstances are favorable. This means that anyone may have to wait for any space of time until the master has judged that this time has arrived. More than a little fortitude is necessary if the pupil is to be able to endure the waiting which this involves. This is one of the reasons why Sufis teach, or have taught, their followers to distinguish between the desire to learn and the impulsion to be stimulated with thoughts and actions. It is often necessary to abstain from applying any stimuli to the learner while he or she is waiting for the master's special baraka, or high spiritual force, to be available under the right conditions. But certain aspects of Sufi teachings are put into words, and these tell us three striking things which can certainly be useful, especially for those who have not yet studied the classical teachings sufficiently to have absorbed the lessons from them. 1. It is impossible to eliminate by oneself many of the ideas and actions which disqualify intending disciples. 2. Sufi literature, in structure but not in emotional content, helps to prepare the mind with patterns which are the vital factors underlying the stories, biographies, aphorisms, and so on, which are their overt side. And 3. Those who do not trust the Sufis are themselves most likely to be both untrusting and untrustworthy. These statements, indeed, were indicated centuries ago in 1695 by the writer of The Testament of One of Us, Haji Yunus, for the following reasons, which contemporary Sufis declare to be still applicable. 1. One would normally not guess this and would, on the contrary, as with all other teachings, imagine that we must be instructed how to combat our own weaknesses and that we must face them alone. 2. Nobody ever really looks at structure and pattern, only at what are in fact superficialities. Everyone craves excitement. And 3. This assertion could only be made by a deceiver, or else by someone who speaks with the real authority of those who know what they say. Few deceivers, however, would dare to say it. Today we can add, from the last century of research in psychology, that many, if not all, mistrustful people are so because they are themselves untrustworthy. It seems quite likely that the emergence, perhaps the evolution, of the new languages of the behavioral sciences have stimulated the Sufis' higher echelons, conspicuously via Idries Shah, to represent their materials and to signal to us their continuing presence in current idioms. After all, the major literatures of the Middle East, as they emerged, were used by the Sufis to such an extent that it is almost impossible to study them fully without a knowledge of Sufism. Again, with the medieval upflow of learning, the Sufis put their imprint on the thought systems, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, which lasted until the era, quite recently, of the soft sciences' emergence in the late 19th century. One is almost tempted to say that an observer who had discerned the alacrity with which Sufis have for so long adopted the current idiom, whether it was alchemy, poetry, chivalry, or anything else, would be likely to seek the outstanding Sufi voice among us in intercultural work, and in the social sciences plus psychology in its widest sense, as well as in spiritual areas. Now listen to the almost surprised tone and the content of some of our contemporary Western observers reacting to this self-same phenomenon of people from the East using our most modern tools as it unfolds before their eyes. They admire it, they are impressed, but one is not certain that they understand it, or that they think that they do, although one can clearly feel that they sense that it is of great importance. Taken, in the order in which they appear, from a catalogue of books which quotes recent British and American opinion on Sufi books, we find the commentators intrigued, interested, impressed, and certain that this is something of very great importance indeed. A peep show into the world which most people do not imagine exists, says The Guardian. The American scholar, not celebrated as the most innovative of journals, characterizes the Sufi materials as nothing less than a way of relearning to use the mind. Strikingly appropriate for our time and situation is the statement of the London Sunday Times. The ultimate, however, comes from the opinion of the writer in Psychology Today. The work of Idries Shah must be considered a major cultural event of our time. Similar sentiments appear, too, in the press and in learned journals of the Islamic East, generally considered to be hidebound and backward. They are to be found in such mass circulation papers as the Daily Mail or the Evening News, both of London. The Sufi influence in the East and West for our time is well and truly underway. The only thing which could halt it is our own capacity of understanding. This podcast is copyright 2018, the Idries Shah Foundation.